My name is Linda Halloran. I'm the Community Engagement Manager with Town and Country Federal Credit Union, and want to thank you for joining us tonight for this workshop on managing money, what every Alzheimer's caregiver needs to know. We know that when a loved one is diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, it's often a marathon of emotions and challenges and decisions that families and caregivers need to face every day. And among those many challenges is one and that around personal finance. So we know this is an important issue for many of our members. And so we reached out to the Alzheimer's Association, the main chapters of the Alzheimer's Association, and asked them to join us tonight to talk about this topic. And I'm going to briefly introduce Amy Angelo, who's the program manager for the main chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, to say a couple of words about the organization and introduce our speaker, Ann Romney. Amy?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us here this evening. We're excited to offer this educational program to you. We have this in addition to about 10 other Common Core educational programs that we offer through our website. We have live, just like this, live on Zoom with Q&A programs that we offer that you can register for in advance. And we also have all these programs pre-recorded that you could find on our website under educational programs. In addition to our programs, we have support groups, we do advocacy. We obviously, if some of you might know, through the Walks to End Alzheimer's, we raise our funds. Our fundraising efforts go towards our programs, our support groups, to advance Alzheimer's research and supportive services for people living and facing the disease. So check out our website. That will be up later on in the presentation. And I'd like to introduce Ann Romney. She is one of our longest standing community volunteers, community educators with us. And she does a lot of these live on Zoom community education programs.
I'm glad to be able to be here. And this is as Linda was saying, this is a really important aspect to something that is so encompassing of so many challenges. And we will touch a little bit on the general aspect of Alzheimer's disease, but this one is really focused and really digs deeply into the financial aspect of having a disease such as Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. So this is really focused on the caregiver, because the caregiver becomes ever more critical as the disease advances. The person who is taking care of that individual really has to do some heavy lifting. And I will say here at the very beginning that one of the things we are very concerned about at the Alzheimer's Association is the wear on caregivers. So there's financial, there's emotional, there's literally physical stress associated with caring for another person in such a way that is required of people. So we always say not to go through this alone and to reach out and get information, talk to other people that are going through it as well. We have support groups, education programs like this. We have a helpline that I'll make sure people are aware of. So there are a lot of ways of reaching out and getting support. And that is a really important message in any of the programs that we deliver, is that you're not alone and there are some amazing resources out there. So we encourage that very much. This is one of our most recent programs that we touched on this in other programs that we have, but this one is really developed to really look more at the financial aspect. And we had a grant, and I'm not going to read through all of this. This is just an identifier for how we got the funding to create this program. And again, these are just a variety of organizations that were part of the steering committee that helped to bring this particular program to all of us. So what are our objectives for the next hour is that we want to look at how this caregiving affects finances and list the legal and financial documents that caregivers should put in place. having these discussions, this is one of the questions that I saw that people had submitted earlier. It is really hard to bring these subjects up. They're sensitive. People are hesitant to talk to other people about their finances. So we have some suggestions around how to broach this very difficult conversation. There is a vulnerability to financial abuse and fraud. So there are some steps that people can take to minimize that vulnerability. And then also to begin to create a backup plan in case you as an individual or the home is no longer able to provide the care and the individual has to go into a long-term facility. So those are our broad objectives for this next hour. So just language is always important whenever you're talking about any topic. There are some language words that we'll be using. So just some basic pieces here. We talk about caregiver, care partner, can be a family member, friend, a legal guardian who is part of the support system for someone who has these kinds of health needs and attending to their well-being. And they're big. These needs are really significant. It can also be someone who's managing the money or paying for the expenses of another person. So we will be talking in both contexts when we talk about caregiver, care partner. Finance is simply money and the things that are worth money. So assets that you have and investments and all of the things that go into making somebody's wealth or financial picture. And financial literacy is understanding how to manage the money and how do you handle these day-to-day expenses and how do you plan. And one of the things we absolutely encourage is that if there is a diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's, which Alzheimer's is just the most common form of dementia. That's another definition we like to make clear. That right away, if you haven't already, to begin to really plan and look ahead, because unfortunately that isn't something that everybody does. And sometimes people wait until you're putting out a fire. So we really encourage people to understand these things and to get on the front end of it to the degree that you can. And, I also like to say that there are so many things about the way this type of disease progresses that we have no control over. So if you can focus on the things that you do have control, it can really bring some peace of mind, some very necessary peace of mind. And that would certainly be one of our objectives in offering a program such as this. So we're going to look a little bit around what are these costs that are associated with caregiving. We know that financial literacy is very important because it provides the knowledge and skills needed to better support themselves and others. So sometimes this really affects the caregiver's financial picture as well. We have a couple of little quizzes, so we'll check your knowledge. What percentage of caregivers have out-of-pocket costs as a result of caregiving? And we're not in a live room where I can see hands raised, but in fact, 78% of caregivers. So we were talking about this before people got on, that this is the type of situation that if you have no assets, you might be eligible for Medicaid and might be able to get housing or long-term care. And if you have extreme wealth, then that's the other end of the spectrum where you can probably afford to do whatever kind of care you need. It's the large percentage of people that are in the middle that find this to be a very challenging situation to confront. So we know that more than 3/4 of caregivers have to come up with out-of-pocket assets in terms to deal with the caregiving, the household, and medical expenses. And there's a lot of legislation out there. It is a bipartisan issue, how to fund research and the different needs that people have who are dealing with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, but it's never quite enough in terms of how things are today and how they are playing out at this point. So employment, caregiving, we know that there's early onset dementia, and that's another topic that we will address, where someone who's still in the workplace, but oftentimes the person who has dementia or Alzheimer's is no longer in the workplace, but perhaps the person that's caring for them is. And there's tremendous amount of stress and pressure put on a person that can affect their ability to be at work and to concentrate and do what they have to do. Many caregivers end up reducing their hours, taking time off, retiring early, or quitting their jobs. This is one of the ways that organizations can come up with some flex and some ways for people to be able to manage this, because it becomes such a wear and tear, and you don't want people to have to quit. So to the extent that people can continue to stay employed, that's important. Since COVID, we all know that people can work at home in ways we never thought they could before. So that's, again, another opportunity, a way an organization might be able to be supportive. And if people are having to give up their hours or their job, then they might incur more debt. It makes it harder for them to save for retirement or anything else, and having to cut back. So we have a few vignettes, little videos that are in here. We're
So
going to
some
listen
of the
to one.
sacrifices I've had to make financially due to having to care for my mom were things like paying for some of her care, doctor visits in some cases, clothing, to try to limit the spend down of her money. So I supplemented where I could, and then retired early, which impacted my income, to continue to care for her, and then looking into getting a part-time job to supplement her memory care, facility care.
And this is a very typical type of scenario that we realize happens often, all too often. So talking a little bit about the impact on health, as I made a reference to already, that caregiving has a major impact on the caregiver's own health. So some of the most exhausted people I see are people that come to these kinds of workshops that are just lifting at both ends and really taking a toll and trying to do it all on their own. So once again, I'll insert that message about don't do it alone. Get support, get help, get respite care, get other people in your caring community, whether that's neighbors, other family members, people to help step up and do some of this heavy lifting. When the caregivers don't take care of themselves, they also can get medical conditions that can lead to additional expenses. And then, of course, you can't take care of someone else if you're not well yourself. So we know that the self-care piece is really large. And caregivers do. They often put aside their own care needs while they're taking care of someone else, which is a natural response, I think, to the situation, but something to be aware of and to pay attention to. So let's get a little bit more deep into how this disease might affect finances. So a couple more quizzes here. Alzheimer's is a normal part of aging, and actually we know this is not true. We all maybe get a little less sharp along the way. And one of our workshops, one of the programs we have, is looking at the difference between normal age-related cognitive changes versus something that represents Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. But Alzheimer's is a progressive and fatal brain disease. It is not a normal part of aging. Unfortunately, it affects far too many people. Another quiz. Alzheimer's only affects a person's memory, and this is actually not true. We mostly associate it with memory and repetition, but it impacts a person's memory, thinking, and behavior, their ability to do executive functioning skills. And this is where the managing money piece absolutely comes in. And in fact, one of the early warning signs of somebody having Alzheimer's or another form of dementia is confusion around their finances. Perhaps they're not able to make change at a simple restaurant, not able to pay the bill, or no longer paying their home expenses or balancing their checkbook. So money matters start to surface fairly early on, oftentimes in the course of the disease. So we do know that this is a progressive disease, and that it usually progresses slowly in these 3 stages. Every individual is entirely different, so there's no way to say that from start to finish it's typically these many years. My dad had Alzheimer's disease, which he was diagnosed around the age of 87 and progressed to the age of 93. That's not atypical, but it is very unique and different for most people, though it falls into some general stages that we can identify a little bit more clearly. So there's an average 4 to 8 years, but again, it varies. And as it advances through these stages, of course, the needs get greater as well. So your care needs and what you need to do to support that individual gets harder and harder as things progress. So In the early stage, people start to have trouble managing their money, remembering to pay the bills, as I said. And as it gets worse, they're no longer able to communicate their wishes or make financial decisions. This is such an important point to stop and talk a little bit more about. The Alzheimer's Association is such a proponent of early diagnosis and really understanding what might be happening. And one of the main reasons for that is while the person is still able to communicate, those are precious moments, precious times, so that you can get some information about what they may have in terms of financial assets and where those things are, and also to understand their needs and wants regarding how they would like to be taken care of or where they would like to be. If you wait until it progresses, then you lose that opportunity. So having those earlier conversations is really important, and you need to have that early diagnosis in order for that to be so. So early planning allows the person to participate, as I just said. So that's a very important piece. In terms of, well, this is pretty clear. The financial impact is that the income is going down because people are not able to continue working, either the caregiver or the individual themselves, and all of the expenses are going up and up. And we will hear again from a caregiver.
So when we finally moved into assisted living, when we first got the cost, it was going to be $5,000 a month. When we started adding on daily medications and housekeeping and all the other things that come with it, we were quickly at $6,000 per month. In my mind, every month I was, doing the calculations of, all right, how much money does Dad have left? How long can this last? What happens when that goes away?
Yeah, so these are significant numbers. So let's talk a little bit more now about those unique challenges for dementia caregivers. Dementia caregivers have twice the average out-of-pocket caregiving costs than people that are taking care of others who have particularly some other type of disease. 30 to 40% of dementia caregivers experience depression. This is a significant health concern and something that is not to be ignored. And when we say we're really concerned about the caregivers as much as we are the people that have the disease, this is all part of why that is so. 44% of caregivers have anxiety. You can certainly understand why that would be true. And women are still more likely to experience the stress of caregiving. They're more likely to be doing some of the heavy lifting, and that's something that we also need to pay attention to and get other folks to step up to the plate. So I made a little hint to this one earlier, checking your knowledge. People younger than 65 can develop Alzheimer's, and unfortunately that is true. And it's called early onset as opposed to early stage. It's early onset. And it is less common, but it also comes with an additional set of devastating challenges. So if a person is still a breadwinner and still working, and maybe they need to still put some kids through college, now they're not able to continue to do that. That brings a whole additional set of financial stress to an already difficult situation, as well as other social kinds of stresses as well. So we know that this is another devastating aspect. So we'll talk a little bit about this younger or early onset, as it's known. Additional financial challenges. Many report losing or quitting one or more jobs because cognitive changes affected their work. In fact, it's often the workplace that raises the flag, that notices these changes. A person may not be exhibiting some changes at home, that they may be starting to see that the work isn't what it was, it's not coming in on time. People are seeing a drop in the quality of a person's work. This is where employee assistance programs can be helpful in trying to figure out if something's happening and how that gets approached. And as a result, some are not able to maximize their benefits, the disability insurance, the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act protections, or COBRA. And people living with younger onset Alzheimer's have less time. They have less time to plan, and they've not been able to save to the same extent when this happens to somebody much older than under 65. And some additional aspects: care partners, they may have to return to work, increase their hours, or get another job. This is again with the earlier, younger onset. People still have children at home, so they have to have costs associated with raising a family. the ability to save for a child's education and other family expenses, may still have mortgages, car payments, loans, or debt. I know of a family in Maine where the woman's husband got early onset, younger onset Alzheimer's. They still had they had a house, they had money saved for the college education of their children. The only thing that they were able to protect was the house, but the money for college was something that they could not hold on to in terms of the demands of the expenses. So this was quite a few years ago, and I'll just, the asterisk is that perhaps that's changed, but I'm not sure. Amy may know if it has. And then there are resources often that are only available to people age 65 or older: Social Security, Medicare eligibility. And so this can end this insurance. If people do have long-term care insurance or family insurance, this can also affect that and how that comes into play. Another subgroup, so we have people who have early stage or early onset, and also the LGBTQ community, more likely to be living alone. They may not have children that can help support and help do some of the caregiving. Eventually, a person with Alzheimer's will need someone else to take over paying the bills and making these decisions, financial plans. And the financial plans may help make sure that non-related caregivers access the person's money. So that's the kind of thing that can be legally put into a plan. There are estate planners, there are people who specialize in this type of healthcare proxies and living wills and things that address some of these issues, but they need to be addressed. Otherwise, a person can be left really in limbo. So that early planning, that's one of our, we keep repeating that message. There's so many benefits for knowing what's happening early and getting into the planning on the early side. So here we have some different scenarios here. Who can benefit from putting financial plans in place for the future? People with a lot of money, people retiring, caregivers, low-income houses. Well, really all of the above, really everyone. And it's really something that we encourage people to get on ahead of, whether they have a diagnosis or not, but to anticipate the need for financial planning for your future, because we don't know when or what might happen. So that's really something that is universally true, that everyone can benefit by putting a financial plan in place. But when you do have something like this, then you really are on alert. There's the red flag that says get going and start to make a plan and figure out what you're going to do and how you're going to approach it. So for the caregiver, those benefits, as we said, as long as a person's still able to communicate, you can know their personal wishes. You can feel more confident at making important decisions. You can know how to handle the issues and pay for the care. And then there's less chance of making a costly or unwise decision. Some of the facilities, this was on something that someone sent earlier as well, the waiting list, the waiting time to get into some of the memory care units. So if you anticipate and you don't wait until the day the person can really no longer remain at home, but you're already anticipating and you're on the wait list for some of these facilities, if they are affordable, that is to your advantage. So we're going to hear a couple more little vignettes.
One of the benefits of putting financial plans in place for caregivers is simply peace of mind. Oftentimes we have a lot of anxiety and fear about the unknown. How long is the disease going to last? What are the care needs going to be? When we think of all of those things that we might be apprehensive about, and we put plans in place for if this happens, here's how we'll handle it. And we really think through, here's what's typical with the disease, here's what I need to be thinking about, and here's my plan for that. It can be such a gift to the whole family because people can settle in and focus on, here's what I need to focus on today, here's what I need to think about right now, without the weight of the what ifs hanging over their head.
And those what ifs are really things that add to the stress and make it harder to really think clearly and figure out what the right decisions are. So the amount of weight that gets lifted when people start to put some plans in place is significant. And now we'll hear from a caregiver.
My mother, by putting plans in place early,
That really helped me because it gives me a sense of confidence that I'm doing the things that she really wants to be done. It allows me to not have to worry about decisions that I make because my mother has already laid out the plan. She's stated her wishes, and my role is really to execute those plans. I have found that making decisions for my own situation can often be difficult. And so it's even harder to make decisions, especially when it comes to medical decisions, financial decisions, to have that responsibility of making those decisions for someone else can be very, very difficult. So, in that my mother was so prepared and had laid out financial plans and really had a structure around her life, that has really allowed me to be less anxious as I perform the caregiving role.
Yeah, two little pieces to add to that is one, it's actually really a gift for the people who are affected by the disease. If they've been clear and they've really communicated their needs, that is a huge gift, so that people don't have to do a lot of the guesswork. The other piece that this woman reminds me to mention is that there are sometimes multiple players. She seems to have the autonomy to figure this out with her mom, but sometimes there are several siblings, and people have different ideas about whether a person should live in an assisted living or the care should always be at home. Whatever these big decisions are, if you know what the person themselves prefers, that can help with clarifying those differences that might come up in a family dynamic. And they will come up. We see this over and over again. For the individual, the person affected, it's the ability to share what they want and as clearly as they can, reassurance that others will follow their wishes and respect them because they've made them clear, and then relief from having those plans in place and not worrying, because people worry about their loved ones and how this will impact them. It's a huge stressor for them.
One benefit of planning early for the person with the disease is that they get to have their say. They get to say, here is how I want things to play out. If there's ever a time when I can't live alone or when I need this kind of care, here's how I'd like that to happen. Here's who I want to be making decisions on my behalf if I can't make them for myself. So they get to have their say. In addition, they get to make choices about how they live their life, what they do now and in the months and years to come, with this additional knowledge of, hey, I've got this disease and here's what I can expect. And so a lot of people tell us that they choose differently, and they choose differently from each other. I talked to one person with Alzheimer's who said, you know what? I want every day to be regular. I want to work in my flower beds. I want to play with my grandkids. I want to have lunch with a friend. I just want lots of great regular days. I've talked to other folks with dementia diseases who said, I want to do the things I've been looking forward to. I want to take some big trips, or I want to do some really special things with the people I'm close to. So it's not the same for everybody, but the person with the disease gets to make choices and gets to live life more on their terms.
Yeah, very well said. So these conversations are not easy conversations to have. It's very difficult. It's often difficult for people to talk about having the disease. There are a certain percentage, I think it's roughly 50%, I'm not sure, of people who have Alzheimer's who never acknowledge that it's so. That was true in the case of my father, who had Alzheimer's disease, and he never acknowledged it. But there are many people who are fully aware and talk about it and can plan and can engage. So either way, the conversations are difficult to broach. So we're going to look a little bit about how to make those a little bit more available to people. It can make people, for obvious reasons, anxious and uncomfortable. It's hard to know how to start the conversation. A lot of people feel like they're invading a person's privacy by asking different questions around financial matters. Even in families, that's often a taboo subject, and so that dynamic is at play. So one way to begin is to think about what your goals are and what documents you will review or discuss. And there are different kinds of documents, and we need to talk about having the ability to sign for people and take care of matters. That's a legal document that needs to happen. You need to include other family members and close friends sometimes in these discussions. Who's going to pitch in if you don't live right near that person? You might want to grant the power of attorney to a local attorney or a neighbor or a trusted friend. It has to be someone, obviously, that you feel tremendous confidence in. It's important to pick your time and place where you have this conversation, not something that's on the fly as you're about to leave, but something that you can sit down and really focus on. We also talk about having multiple conversations and not trying to bite off the whole thing in one big conversation, but to do it slowly and sense along the way how receptive or not the person is to the conversation. It's important that you encourage that the honesty is important so that you really understand what the financial picture is and you also understand what their wishes are. So don't rush through this. It's something that you will probably do and revisit on several occasions. It's not a one and done type of conversation. It's just a start. Knowing that it can be hard to help manage finances, that's an important thing to recognize and hold on to. Asking about the person's wishes and not judging the person and their decisions. That you may think, oh, it's silly to go off and want to travel and do all these things. Maybe you should save your money for the care you're going to need. Try to be supportive around what that person's wishes are. If the person has difficulty communicating, then we have a whole program on how to communicate with people as the Alzheimer's progresses, but it's important to speak in short and clear sentences, pausing, making sure that what you're saying is being understood, making good eye contact, leaning in and having good body language that says you're there and you're supportive. So those are really important pieces. As the language diminishes, then the other forms of communication become much more significant, and to be aware of those things. Notice if the conversation is becoming stressful and table it, come back to it at another time, and try to end on a positive note. Check in regularly. And one of the things we suggest is that you sort of combine a conversation like this with something pleasant. So maybe you go for a walk and you go for something good to eat and you have this conversation, and you don't just sit down and make this a very one and done or one and heavy type of conversation.
Advice I'd have for other caregivers if the conversation about finances doesn't go well at first is to keep trying. It took a while for my mom to come around, and I was exasperated. I would try to catch her at a good moment, and sometimes she'd give me a little tidbit here or there, so it might take time to just pull it all together. It's sort of trying to understand the moment if you're having a good time. What I did also was to bring up friends. My mother was very empathetic, so if I'd say, oh, remember so-and-so? They had a situation with their mom or dad or family member where something happened and the person didn't know what to do, or they didn't have understanding about it. So that was really hard on them. She'd say, oh, really? And I'd say, yeah, see, that would help me if, we talked about that kind of thing. And that would usually get her. So in my case, that empathy is what I would kind of try to use for her to open up more, but continuing to do it, catching on a good day. That was key, because it took time and it was piecemeal. Small victories, just get as much as you can over time and keep at it, because there usually will be a window where you can kind of break through, or in some cases it might be someone else has to talk to them.
So it's that the reassurance, the trust piece is really important. It is a fact that often people get a little bit suspicious when they develop a cognitive decline in this way, and they might think that people are trying to take their money. So it's very, very important that you reinforce that you're trying to do the best thing for them, that you have their interest at heart, and that it's a matter of them helping you help them. which is what I think she was referring to in terms of her mother. So I think if you can make that point that I'm trying to help you, and in order to do that, I need this information so that we can do the best thing and make things as comfortable for you as we possibly can, is important. Some additional tips. Well, we talked about that. We're going to advance along. And then just some common but really significant ways to approach difficult conversations that apply to all kinds of difficult conversations, but starting with something positive. I've always admired how you handle your finances. I want to learn more about what works for you. I respect your privacy, but it would give me peace of mind to know you have plans, so I can follow your wishes. And noticing that you seem to be a little worried. What worries you most? What can I do to help? So those kinds of empathetic and positive kinds of openers can be very helpful. And then there's the piece around I want to talk with you so that you can access them in case of emergency. So sometimes the individual themselves will be willing to do that, recognizing that there needs to be information that's accessible during an emergency. And this is the best case hope, is that it's coming from the person affected by the disease who actually reaches out and wants to get that kind of help and support. It does happen, but it's not as typical as the resistance. We run much more often into the people who do not want to go down that road and talk about those things. So one of the things that we encourage, and this I think is something that we can probably send. It's just really a handout that would go along with this presentation around how you plan. It's what we've just been talking about, having these conversations, planning, what are your goals, what are the documents you want to review, what trusted family members or close friends should be part of the conversation. And again, that trust issue keeps coming up over and again. What's the best time of day for that person? What can you talk about that will be quiet enough to minimize the stress? Or where can you talk where it will be a comfortable place? And then this has all these different conversation starters, etc. It's really important to be patient and understanding, not judging, explaining that you just like to get a clear picture so you can help them. Focus on the easy wins first. So maybe there's one little step. Maybe you're going to be able to start balancing the checkbook, and that will be a significant piece, a sort of low-hanging fruit. If a person has difficulty communicating, again, use those skills, the body language, the short sentences, really important. If it's stressful, take a break. Try to end on a positive note, try to start and end on a positive note. And if the individual doesn't need help now, maybe you do well, what if? Let's just talk about what if scenarios, which is actually how I began with my parents. I could see things were coming down the pike, so to speak, and we started to have some, well, what if this were to happen type of conversations. And you should have these routine kinds of conversations prior to something of a crisis nature happening. So that's another really important piece. So we talked at the beginning about this being one of the issues, which is the vulnerability to financial abuse and fraud. And we'll do a little knowledge check here. On the average, how much money do Americans aged 80 and older lose each year as a result of financial abuse, fraud, and scams? And unfortunately, it's the top number here. And I'm sure just going up from there. So studies show that financial exploitation is the most common form of elder abuse. And this is not just for people who have, of course, dementia or another form of cognitive decline, but they are very vulnerable to this, more so than some other folks. We hear about older folks getting scammed all the time that do not have a cognitive impairment, but for people who do, this is a very, very serious concern. We also know that we're only hearing about a fraction of these. This is data from 2019, so already we know that these numbers are only going up as these things typically do. So this is an important issue to be concerned about. It can occur in any kind of setting. Obviously, individuals with dementia have a greater risk. They may not remember or that it even happened, and they might not report this abuse. And they may struggle to make good financial decisions, and this we know happens.
People living with dementia are more susceptible perhaps to fraud and financial abuse than other people because they have a disease that's attacking their brain. And so their ability to solve problems, to think about things logically, to have insight may be impaired, and they may be able to be tricked by people they trust or people who seem nice or seem trustworthy in a way that they wouldn't have been at an earlier time.
Yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward how that can happen. So here are some of the early signs that you may observe, take notice of, that may indicate that there's a problem in terms of managing money. You might see an unopened bill, that someone who's typically always on top of their finances, all of a sudden there's some bills piling up. The worst case scenario with something like that is that it's a utility bill, and and it results in a shutdown of that utility. Some surprise purchases, something very large or unusual or repetitive purchase that makes no sense. Lots of shirts, all of a sudden, lots of shirts. Or multiple of the same item, things that they don't need. Perhaps repeated donations to telemarketers. Again, that's another kind of thing where it's not straight up a scam per se, but we know that these people are, nonprofits are calling all the time looking for money, and if people just keep doing it and saying yes each time, that becomes a form of abuse in a sense, or missing money and unexplained bank withdrawals. These are all signs that people need to pay attention and be aware that there's something's going on that needs some attention. So in terms of how do you lower this risk of abuse and fraud, there are a few very specific kinds of suggestions. You can agree to a spending limit with the credit card company. You can actually not just make that agreement with your individual there, but rather with the credit card company, set that cap of no more than this amount. Create a separate account for recreational spending. Do as much now. We have so many tools that we didn't have even 10 years ago, where you can do auto pay kinds of things. You can go in and do online banking for a loved one without even being in the same place, so you don't have to go to someone's home and write those checks. Set up automatic notifications for withdrawals or large charges. Try to get as much electronic. I can't say how important that is enough, because people will often, the mail will go missing. In the case of my dad, he liked to tear up the mail. So as much as we can get things electronically, we have much more control over that. Do definitely sign up for the do not call list. And ask the credit card companies to stop sending those those little checks that come and you can transfer your balance to there. That's really an important piece.
So one of the things that I did, my father was very proud. He really didn't want to admit that he had Alzheimer's. So I wanted him to be able to continue to feel good about himself. So I actually set up a checking savings account for him that was joint with me. Because again, I had power of attorney, so I could move things around a bit. I made sure that he always had $200 in that account. Everything else was protected, and he really didn't have access to it anymore. But he didn't know that because he still had that $200. A couple of years into his diagnosis, he actually had somebody stop at his home. He was outside working in his yard. They came by, a couple, old car, and pulled up to the driveway. They had a child with them and said their child was ill. And they said they needed money for health care for this child. My father was always very generous. As he became older and as he became more impaired with Alzheimer's, he became more generous. And so his inclination was to help this couple. They took him to the credit union. They asked him to withdraw all of his funds. So he did. He had access to that $200 that he knew about, and he gave it to them. They left him there in the parking lot, and he walked home. So it was really awful that happened to him, but his money was protected because of the safeguards that we had put up. Everything else was still there, and I was able to replace that $200. So we tried very hard to do everything we could to protect him financially, but also to make sure that we didn't take away his sense of self-esteem.
Right. So in addition, that was, very well done on the part of that family. And we encourage people to just allow a person to have just a little spending money too, just some $20 or something of cash so that they can go into a store down the street and buy a cold drink or have a little bit of cash on hand is something that is important for self-esteem. So let's talk a little more specifically about what those financial and legal needs are. We want to, the whole idea is that stress and lack of time often prevent people from making these plans. You can make the process easier by breaking things into simple steps, doing one thing at a time. And you can take many of these action steps without a financial advisor or attorney. There are professionals that can help you, but a lot of this are things that you can do on your own. If you are looking at income and spending, write down what's coming in and what's going out, and see if there are places to cut back, to have a budget, and build up savings for unexpected care costs.
One thing that I would suggest is when you have those monthly bills is to call. I had cable and I said, hey, I can't pay this amount when I'm looking at all of the bills that we had. And they didn't want to lose me as a customer, so they reduced the cost of the cable. Also, the medical bills, even though you get a demand for payment for a certain amount of money, call them, go on the payment plan, talk to the hospital about the payment plan, talk to the different utilities. I was on a budget for heat. I was on a budget for electricity. Reach out and ask. And don't do all those calls at one day. Break it up and do one at a time so you don't get overwhelmed with it.
Yeah, usually people will find a way to make something work.
Keeping within a budget, the budget is really, really important for food, because it's very tempting to go into a grocery store and find all kinds of delicacies. So that's been a big change and a good one. We found that for the two of us, we were spending a lot of money on groceries. So taking a look at that is really helped.
And we know now that with inflation and things, groceries are sky high, so it becomes even more imperative. So taking an inventory of assets and debts, assets being anything that has value that you own, and debt is anything that you've borrowed, paid back over time, like credit cards and loans. So you want to make sure you have a good big picture of what those things are, and then try to get a hold on what the cost of the care will be, whether that's an ongoing medical treatment, prescriptions, personal care supplies, adult day services, in-home care services, full-time residential care. These are sort of the big bullets of the types of where the costs can go. So it's important to name what those are and figure out what that means in terms of your own situation. And then making arrangements for ongoing, managing the paying of the bills, arranging for benefit claims. I know I used to spend a lot of time on that. I learned a lot about how Medicare works and the claims process, making investment decisions if there are those to be made, and then the tax return preparation. I'm not going to open up these activities because they lock up my presentation, but there is material that I believe we can send as a follow-up that will have, it just basically organizes all of these things that we're talking about now and gives you a place to put these inventories, etc. So there are different types of places where we can look for financial resources that can help with this. Whatever your personal resources are, your income or your retirement accounts, 401ks, savings, stocks, bonds, personal property. Then there are the insurance, federally funded, Medicare, all the parts A, B, and D, veterans benefits, Social Security disability, compassionate allowance initiative. And then there is sometimes different states have Medicaid, Medigap. And this is a place where you can, a website, benefitscheckup.org. This will be recorded so you'll all get all of this. And you can also call our helpline, which is listed down there. And that number is really important. If we were in a live program, we'd be handing you these little cards with our helpline, but it's 24/7, and it's professionals that are on the other end of the line, social workers and people that can really help with anything from an urgent situation that you find yourself in to something much more far-reaching, like how do I understand where might I talk to a legal elder care lawyer that can help me plan? Where can I get to a support group? All the different kinds of things through our helpline. So in terms of the legal planning, the whole idea is that it makes sure a person can designate a trusted family member or a friend to make decisions. Make those plans as early as you possibly can so everyone is well prepared. And you may be getting advice from an attorney, but you can also complete these documents on your own. And you want to also review whatever might already exist. So many people already have many of these things, but sometimes they are outdated. So you want to know where they are and when have they been updated. Make sure that you have a durable power of attorney for both finance and healthcare, and a living will as well. These are some of the most basic important pieces to have. And so here are some resources. Again, these will be in the presentation, so you'll get that. The Alzheimer's Association and the AARP Community Resource Finder. There's Elder Care Locator, National Elder Law Foundation, Legal Services Corporation, etc. So these are all resources that you can take advantage of. And it's important, the more information you have and the more you identify resources, the less stress you have when you know that there are different ways you can turn. And then, as with all planning, having backup plans, because we all know that some of our best plans don't always work out, because this is something that we don't know how long it will last or what the needs will be and when the needs will occur. Maybe they occur earlier than you thought, or maybe it's later than you thought, but you don't know. So it is important. Talk with family and friends about who could take over if things get stressful for you, or you end up in a health concern of your own. It's really important to know that there are other people that can step in. Again, it should never be just one person that's holding all this. You just need to have some support and help in doing this. Having a trusted backup agent for that power of attorney, that's a very concrete, specific backup, and you clearly need to have that in place. Also an up-to-date list of any kind of medical information that keeps changing perhaps, and it's important to have multiple copies, and that anyone who's involved in the care of that individual knows where those those lists and those medications are. And contact information, of course, for any doctor or anyone else who is involved in that person's care. And we really can't ignore the need to take care of your own health. So you also need to be visiting the doctor regularly, eating well, staying physically active, looking into whatever breaks, respite care that people can come, support services, and give you a break, even if it's just to go off for an afternoon and have lunch with a friend and take a walk. These are the kinds of things that help rejuvenate people and help them stay well, really important. And for some of us, it's not easy to ask for help and to accept help from others, but we need to kind of break through that. There are a lot of people that are struggling with this. Most people know someone. If it's not in their immediate family, then it's their neighbor across the street's family or your best friend's mother. So it is really, it affects so many of us, and most people are more than happy to want to help and support and have been through or might go through something very similar. So try to break through that resistance to asking for help, and think of it as having a care team. It may be medical people, it may be neighbors, family, friends, professional respite care providers, but think about it in terms of a team. And I can't say enough about the resources from the Alzheimer's Association. Never any charge for these resources. If you are more comfortable on the phone, then you can pick up and talk to someone on our helpline. Our website, alzheimers.org, has a plethora of information, resources, educational programs such as this, You can learn about where to get onto a support group, etc. So we'll hear.
Even if you have a financial plan in place, you can still find yourself challenged by the day-to-day financial realities. And if a person feels overwhelmed or needs help, there's so much help available through the Alzheimer's Association. That's a great place to start. You can get a lot of information on our website at alz.org. You can also call our 24-hour helpline at 1-800-272-3900. We're staffed round the clock. We've got dementia care experts, master's level counselors and social workers who are ready to talk when you are and are happy to talk through whatever issues you're going through.
Really important resource. And we don't have these worksheets for you right here, but what we encourage people to do is to take the information and to put down some action steps and some things that you're going to do, and figure out what those pieces are that you need to put in play for your own financial plan. And maybe it's to have that conversation. Maybe that's your first step, is to broach the subject so you know where you're starting from, and to consider who else is a part of your team, who else is going to stand and be part of these decisions and part of the management of all of this. And what lawyers do you know, or what medical people do you know, and what friends do you know that may have been through this that can offer some support and help as well. So that is the official presentation, but I am, of course, very happy to take a question.
So you were mentioning that there were a lot of resources on the website, and so if I just go on the website, I'll be able to browse through like a catalog of things that are offered?
Absolutely. The website just keeps getting better and better. I think it's pretty user-friendly these days, and you can do searches, and but you can find sections that have financial information, and you can learn more about the disease itself, depending on where you are around your interest or need to know. And so they're all we have, like Amy said, there are like a dozen programs, and you can watch many of these and read different things. There are blogs where other people put different experiences that they're going through. There are all kinds of ways to learn and to stay connected and to find out what the resources are. So the website is great. Just jump on and move around and go back to it at any time.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. Because my mom is in long-term care facility right now, but we are in that huge percentage of people where it's just like the expenses are absolutely astronomical. Like it almost seems like it's impossible, and the system is against us, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. So I want to like learn how to swim my way through and try to figure it out. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're naming something that we as a country need to figure out, because it is enormous and stressful, and this number is not getting smaller in terms of how many people are affected by these types of diseases. So it's a national health issue. It's a healthcare problem that we need to grapple with, and I do understand how devastating it can be. Really rough.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Heather.
Heather, I put my email in the chat, and that's for everyone. If you have specific questions, you can reach out to me. We could schedule a call as well.
I think just keep trying to learn more and attend things like this so that you can find out what is out there and how do you approach these things. And there are a lot of people who get what's going on and want to support and help. It's a big challenging thing to go through. So I wish you all the best with whatever is happening.
Thank you, Ann. As you're talking, one of the things that comes to mind is that really it takes a village, and it takes a village and building your team, because it is a long time kind of thing that, to have all the help and support. And I hope when you think about your team, you think about your financial institution. And, Town and Country, we're happy to work with you on dealing with your debt and dealing with budgeting and dealing with other financial things that come up that you want some help and support on. So, you know, between your family and your caregivers and your medical staff and your lawyers, you know, think of your financial institution and the Alzheimer's Association, which with all the many resources that they have is going to be there to help you get through it. So I want to say thank you for all of you to be with us tonight, and Anne and Amy, and we hope you have a good evening. And please reach out if you've got questions, any other questions that come to mind after tonight.